The bright lights and excitement of the Family Feud studio create an atmosphere of fun and friendly competition. But beneath the surface, every audience member brings their own story, their own struggles, and their own reasons for seeking a moment of escape through entertainment. When Steve Harvey noticed a small child quietly crying in the audience during what should have been a routine taping, he made a split-second decision that surprised everyone present, immediately stopping the show. What unfolded next would teach everyone in attendance a profound lesson about compassion, priorities, and the unexpected connections that can form when someone chooses humanity over entertainment. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon in July 2024 at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The production team was midway through their third taping of the day, and the energy remained high despite the demanding schedule. Steve Harvey, dressed in one of his signature tailored suits, was in top form, keeping the audience laughing between questions. The Gonzalez family from Houston had just taken a commanding lead against the Pattersons from Minneapolis. Both families represented the wholesome, all-American appeal that makes Family Feud so popular. The Gonzalezes were 3 generations of educators with a spirited grandmother who kept the audience laughing with her quick comebacks, while the Pattersons were a blended family who had bonded over their shared love of community service. In the audience that day sat 8-year-old Elijah Wilson, accompanied by his father, Marcus. They were seated about 5 rows back, close enough to see the expressions on the contestants' faces. Elijah wore a bright blue t-shirt with a superhero logo and had been looking forward to this taping for months. His father had secured the tickets as a special treat, a rare father-son outing meant to create happy memories during a difficult time. What most people in the studio didn't know was that the Wilson family was going through an immense personal struggle. Elijah's mother, Sophia, had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer 3 months earlier and was currently undergoing an aggressive course of chemotherapy. The family's life had been upended by hospital visits, medical bills, and the emotional weight of uncertainty. Marcus had brought Elijah to the show, hoping to give his son a few hours of normalcy and joy, a brief respite from the heavy atmosphere at home. For the first half hour, it seemed to be working. Elijah had laughed at Steve's jokes and watched with excitement as the families competed. But then, something on stage triggered an unexpected emotional response in the boy. The question Steve asked was innocent enough. Name something a mother always reminds her children to do before they leave the house. As the Gonzalez family called out answers like, brush your teeth, and do your homework, something shifted in Elijah. Perhaps it was the mention of mothers, or maybe it was simply that the accumulated stress finally found an outlet. Whatever the cause, silent tears began streaming down his face. At first, only those sitting immediately around Elijah noticed. Marcus put his arm around his son, whispering reassurances. But children's emotions rarely stay contained, and soon Elijah's silent tears transformed into quiet sobs that he tried desperately to muffle with his hands. Steve Harvey, a consummate professional with decades of experience, was in the middle of bantering with the contestants when something caught his peripheral vision. Despite the bright stage lights that make it difficult to see the audience clearly, he noticed the small, shaking form of a child in distress. Most hosts would have continued with the show, perhaps signaling for a production assistant to quietly check on the situation. After all, the cameras were rolling, a live audience was watching, and 2 families were in the middle of a heated competition. The show must go on. But Steve Harvey has never been most hosts. Steve paused mid-sentence, the familiar rhythm of the game show suddenly disrupted. He turned his full attention to the audience section where Elijah sat. Hold up, Steve said, raising his hand. I'm sorry, families, but we need to pause for a minute. The contestants looked confused. The producers' voices came through Steve's earpiece, asking what was happening, but he gently removed it and placed it in his pocket. "There's a young man in our audience who's upset," Steve said, pointing toward Elijah. "And I can't in good conscience continue until we make sure he's okay." The cameras followed Steve's gaze, and suddenly Elijah and Marcus found themselves the unexpected focus of attention. Marcus looked mortified, clearly embarrassed that his son's distress had disrupted the show. "I'm so sorry," Marcus called out, attempting to stand and leave with Elijah. "We can step outside. Please continue." But Steve shook his head. "No, sir. You stay right there." His voice was gentle but firm. "Nobody's in trouble here. I just want to make sure this young man is all right." Steve signaled to security to allow him into the audience section, something rarely done during tapings. The audience murmured as Steve Harvey, one of television's most recognizable personalities, made his way through the crowded rows to reach Elijah and Marcus. The production team was momentarily frozen, unsure how to proceed. The executive producer spoke urgently through the headsets of nearby crew members. "Should we cut the cameras? Take a break?" But the director made a quick decision. "No, keep rolling. This is real." When Steve reached Elijah and Marcus, he knelt down to be at eye level with the boy, completely unconcerned about creasing his expensive suit. "Hey, young man," Steve said softly. "I'm Steve. What's your name?" "Elijah," the boy answered between sniffles, clearly overwhelmed by the attention. "Elijah, that's a strong name," Steve replied. "I noticed you were upset, and in my house, we don't just ignore when someone's hurting. You want to tell me what's going on?" Marcus placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Mr. Harvey, we really don't want to disrupt your show. It's just been a tough time for our family." Steve looked up at Marcus, recognizing the exhaustion and worry etched in the man's face, expressions he'd seen in his own mirror during difficult chapters of his life. "Sir, with all due respect," Steve said, loud enough for nearby audience members to hear, "this isn't just a show. We're all human beings first. The game can wait." The studio had fallen completely silent. The contestants on stage watched with a mixture of confusion and concern. The producers, having realized Steve wasn't going to be deterred, had signaled for everyone to stay in place while this unexpected situation unfolded. Elijah looked up at his father, who nodded gently, giving permission to speak. "My mom is sick," Elijah said, his voice small but clear in the hushed studio. "She has cancer, and I miss how things used to be. When you asked about moms, I remembered how she always used to tell me to wear a jacket, even when it wasn't cold." Fresh tears welled in his eyes. "She's too tired to remind me now." The simple honesty of the child's words sent a ripple through the audience. Several people could be heard sniffling. Even the usually composed Steve Harvey appeared momentarily at a loss for words, visibly moved by the boy's candor. Marcus filled the silence. "My wife Sophia was diagnosed 3 months ago. She's fighting hard, but it's been tough on all of us, especially Elijah. I brought him here today to give him something happy to focus on. I'm sorry we disrupted everything." Steve shook his head firmly. "Sir, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for. Nothing at all." He turned back to Elijah. "Young man, do you know what courage is?" Elijah wiped his eyes and nodded. "It's like being brave, even when you're scared." "That's exactly right," Steve affirmed. "And what you're doing right now, being honest about your feelings, caring so deeply for your mom, that's real courage. I think everyone in this room could learn something from you." Steve stood up and addressed the entire studio audience and the contestants. "Folks, we talk a lot about family on this show. It's in our name, Family Feud. But sometimes we get so caught up in the game, in the competition, in the laughs, that we forget what family really means. It's about being there for each other during the hardest times. The executive producer's voice came through the floor manager's headset, finally accepting that this moment transcended the planned show. Let Steve lead. This is more important than the schedule. Steve continued, I think we all need to take a moment to remember what really matters. These two families up here, he gestured to the contestants, are playing for money, yes, but Elijah and his family are fighting for something far more precious. The Gonzalez family's matriarch stepped forward. Mr. Harvey, if it's all right with you, I think I speak for all of us when I say we'd be honored to take a break and perhaps do something for this young man and his family. Carmen Patterson from the opposing team nodded in agreement. Absolutely. The game can wait. What had started as a disruption was transforming into something unexpected, a genuine moment of human connection, breaking through the polished surface of entertainment television. Steve Harvey looked back at Elijah and Marcus with newfound determination. Sir, I hope you'll allow me to ask, how is your wife's treatment going? Is there anything specific your family needs right now? Marcus seemed taken aback by the direct question, but responded honestly. The doctors are optimistic, but the treatments are rough. Sophia had to stop working as a nurse, which has put financial strain on us. The medical bills. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable, discussing such personal matters on what was supposed to be a game show. Steve nodded understandingly. He turned to address the production team. I'm making an executive decision here. We're going to take a real break, not just a commercial, and figure out how we can help this family. The director signaled that the cameras were still rolling, but had pulled back to a wider shot, capturing the entire scene. The studio audience, rather than becoming restless with the interruption, seemed fully invested in what was unfolding. During the impromptu break, Steve gathered the production team, both competing families, and a few key staff members in a huddle near the stage, occasionally glancing back at Elijah and Marcus. After several minutes of intense discussion, Steve returned to the Wilsons with a plan. Elijah, Mr. Wilson, here's what we're going to do, Steve began. First, I want you both to be my special guests for the rest of today's taping. Would that be okay? Elijah nodded, his earlier tears now replaced with a look of wonder. Second, Steve continued, both families have agreed to something extraordinary. If it's all right with you, they'd like to dedicate this game to Sophia. They've also agreed that regardless of who wins, they want to split their winnings with your family to help with those medical bills. Marcus began to protest. That's incredibly generous, but we couldn't possibly. Respectfully, sir, Steve interrupted gently. Sometimes the hardest thing to do when you're carrying a heavy load is to let others help you carry it. These families want to do this, and if you're worried about their sacrifice, don't be, because Family Feud is going to match whatever they win and give each family the full amount. A murmur of approval swept through the audience. But we're not stopping there, Steve continued. Our production company has connections with several major cancer treatment centers. We'd like to connect you with specialists who can review Sophia's case and ensure she's receiving the very best care available. Marcus appeared overwhelmed, struggling to maintain his composure. I don't know what to say. It's more than we could have ever expected. Sometimes blessings come from unexpected places, Steve said. And there's one more thing. He turned to address the audience directly. Folks, in my career, I've learned that communities have incredible power when they come together. I'm personally donating $10,000 to the Wilson family, and I'm inviting anyone here who feels moved to contribute to a fund we're setting up for Sophia's treatment. What happened next surprised even Steve. Without prompting, people began rising from their seats, opening wallets and purses. The first to approach was an elderly woman who pressed a $20 bill into Marcus's hand. My Harold had cancer 5 years ago, she said. He's in remission now. Never give up hope." One by one, audience members came forward, some with cash, others writing checks, many simply offering words of encouragement and promises of prayers. The production assistants quickly brought out collection boxes, and the spontaneous fundraiser continued for nearly 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Elijah had become the center of attention for both competing families. The Gonzalez grandmother had pulled a deck of cards from her purse and was teaching him a game, while the Patterson children shared their snacks with him. The boy who had been crying just an hour earlier was now laughing. When the impromptu donation period concluded, one of the production assistants quietly informed Steve of the preliminary total. Over $23,000 had been collected from the audience members alone. Steve returned to Marcus, who was visibly moved by the outpouring of support. "Sir, it looks like you're leaving today with more than you came with, not just financially, but knowing how many people care without even knowing you." "I don't have words," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "This will mean so much to Sophia. Just knowing we're not alone in this fight." Steve placed a hand on his shoulder. "You never were alone. Sometimes we just need a reminder that there are good people everywhere, ready to help if given the chance." Turning back to the audience and the patient contestants, Steve addressed the entire studio. "Now, if everyone's ready, I think we should get back to our game, with renewed perspective on what we're really celebrating here: family, community, and the strength we find in each other." The taping resumed with Elijah and Marcus seated in special chairs next to Steve's podium. The atmosphere in the studio had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine game show taping had become something deeper and more meaningful, a reminder of the human capacity for compassion and generosity. As the game progressed, Elijah gradually became more engaged, even whispering suggestions to Steve, who playfully relayed them to the contestants. By the time they reached the fast money round, Elijah was fully invested in the outcome, cheering enthusiastically for both families. In an extraordinary display of sportsmanship, the Gonzalez and Patterson families collaborated during the final rounds rather than competing against each other, strategizing together to maximize their collective winnings for the Wilson family's benefit. This unprecedented approach to Family Feud resulted in one of the highest combined scores in the show's history. When the final tally was announced, the total amount raised for Sophia's treatment, combining the game winnings, the audience donations, Steve's personal contribution, and a matching donation from the production company, exceeded $125,000. As the taping concluded, Marcus embraced Steve with tears in his eyes. "How can I ever thank you? You've changed everything for us." Steve shook his head. "I didn't do this. Everyone here did this together. And that's the real lesson for all of us today." What had begun with a child's tears had culminated in a powerful demonstration of humanity's capacity for kindness. As the audience finally departed, many stopped to exchange contact information with Marcus, offering ongoing support and encouragement for the journey ahead. The production team, initially frustrated by the interruption to their schedule, now moved with purpose, collecting donation information and organizing the logistics for the Wilson family's support network. The tension of deadline pressures had been replaced by a sense of shared mission. As Steve prepared to head to his dressing room, Elijah approached him one last time. "Mr. Harvey," the boy said, looking much older than his 8 years, "do you think my mom will get better?" Steve knelt down again to meet Elijah at eye level. "I believe your mom has something powerful on her side now, not just medicine and doctors, but the knowledge that her son is being brave and that so many people are pulling for her. And in my experience, that kind of support makes a real difference." Elijah nodded seriously, then surprised Steve with a tight hug before rejoining his father. Later, when the studio had emptied, Steve sat alone in his dressing room, still processing the events of the day. What had begun as a disruption had transformed into one of the most meaningful experiences of his long career. He made a note to have his team follow up with the Wilson family regularly and ensure the promises made were kept. 3 months later, a special episode of Family Feud aired. It began differently than usual, with Steve Harvey sitting in a comfortable chair rather than standing at his familiar podium. "Today's show is unlike any we've done before," he began, looking directly into the camera. "It's a story about how a moment of genuine human connection transformed not just a family's life, but the way we think about what we do here every day." The episode featured carefully edited footage from that July taping, showing Elijah's tears, Steve's decision to pause the show, and the extraordinary outpouring of support that followed. All participants had given permission for their involvement to be shared, understanding the potential impact of this unusual story. The cameras then cut to a living room where the Wilson family, Marcus, Elijah, and Sophia, sat together on a couch. Sophia still showed signs of her ongoing treatment. Her hair was short and she appeared thin, but her eyes were bright and determined. "When Marcus and Elijah came home that day and told me what had happened, I couldn't believe it," Sophia recounted, holding her son close. "We had been so focused on just getting through each day that we'd forgotten there was still good in the world, unexpected good that can appear when you least expect it." The episode revealed how the support generated from that spontaneous moment had changed everything for the Wilson family. The financial burden had been significantly eased, allowing Sophia to focus entirely on her treatment without the added stress of economic uncertainty. Perhaps, even more importantly, the specialists connected through the show had recommended an adjustment to her treatment plan that had shown promising results. "The doctors are cautiously optimistic," Marcus explained. "They say Sophia is responding well to the new protocol. We still have a long road ahead, but for the first time, it feels like we can see light at the end of the tunnel." Elijah, who had unintentionally started this chain of events, shared his perspective with a wisdom beyond his years. "I was sad that day because I thought nobody understood what our family was going through. But now I know that people do care, even strangers. It makes the hard days easier." The episode then shifted to show how that single incident had rippled outward in unexpected ways. The Gonzalez and Patterson families had stayed in touch with the Wilsons, forming a support network that extended far beyond their day on the show. They had organized meal trains, helped with transportation to medical appointments, and provided companionship during difficult days. But the impact extended even further. Inspired by what they had witnessed, several audience members from that taping had started a cancer support group in their community. One woman had organized a blood drive in Sophia's honor. A man who worked in hospital administration had initiated a program to help families navigate the complex world of medical bills and insurance. "What we witnessed that day," Steve explained as the stories unfolded, "was a reminder that television at its best doesn't just entertain, it connects. It allows us to see each other's humanity and respond to it." The show had changed too. Family Feud had always been about fun and laughter, but now it incorporated a new segment called Family First, highlighting organizations that supported families in crisis. The production company had established a foundation that provided assistance to families facing medical emergencies, with Sophia Wilson serving on the advisory board. "We've been in millions of living rooms for decades," Steve said, "but we had forgotten something essential. Behind every television screen is a real family with real struggles and real triumphs." Elijah reminded us of that with his tears. As the special episode neared its conclusion, Steve reunited with the Wilson family in the studio. Sophia, despite still being in treatment, had insisted on coming to thank everyone in person. "Before my diagnosis, I was the nurse who took care of others," she said, addressing the camera with quiet dignity. "Learning to accept help has been one of the hardest parts of this journey, But what happened here showed me that allowing others to support you isn't weakness. It's another form of strength. The Gonzalez and Patterson families joined them on stage, along with several audience members from the original taping who had remained involved with the Wilsons. What had begun as two separate families competing for a prize had evolved into an extended community bound by compassion and mutual support. Steve addressed the viewers at home with a message that transcended the usual game show fare. We call this show Family Feud, but today we're reminded of a greater truth, that when it really matters, we're all one family. The boundaries that seem to separate us, whether they're between contestants and audience, strangers and friends, or even performer and viewer, can dissolve in an instant when we recognize our shared humanity. He continued, Elijah's tears that day weren't an interruption of our show. They were a call to remember what really matters. And the response, from everyone present, wasn't extraordinary. It was simply human beings at their best, recognizing pain in another and choosing to help rather than look away. Elijah, now standing confidently beside his mother, offered his own perspective. I thought I was having the worst day when I started crying, but it turned out to be the beginning of something good. Mom says sometimes that's how life works. Sophia smiled at her son's wisdom, adding, My prognosis is better now, but even if it weren't, knowing that Elijah has seen such goodness in the world would give me peace. That's what every parent wants, for their child to know they're part of a caring community. As the cameras prepared to transition to a regular episode of Family Feud, Steve offered a final thought. Tomorrow we'll be back to our usual games and laughter, which have their own important place in life. But today, I hope you'll take a moment to look around and notice if someone near you might be silently crying, figuratively or literally. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pause, notice, and ask if we can help. The episode ended not with the usual family celebration and prize announcement, but with a quiet moment of the extended Family Feud family simply being present with each other, a tableau of connection that transcended entertainment to touch something deeper in the human experience. And as the credits rolled, a simple message appeared on screen. For all the families fighting battles we can't see, you are not alone. The episode, when it aired, indeed went viral, not for scandal or spectacle, but for capturing a genuine moment of compassion in an entertainment landscape often criticized for its superficiality. It reminded viewers that even in the most unexpected places, humanity can break through and transform everything. If you were moved by this story of compassion and community coming together to support a family in need, please like and subscribe for more content that celebrates the extraordinary moments that happen when we truly see each other. Sometimes the most powerful television moments aren't scripted, they're simply human.